I learned to swim as an adult. The religion that I grew up in didn't allow for wearing shorts. These legs are just too much for most people to take in. So when the other kids in PE were learning to swim, my pals and I played basketball instead. Still, I love the water. I grew up near a really big lake, and I wanted to feel confident in the water around the water with my kids. So about 10 years ago, I signed up for a one-on-one swimming instruction with a very, very patient teacher. We met up at a local high school pool where our first few sessions were easy. She had me wear fins and hang onto a pool noodle, and I felt like I was moving 100 miles an hour, darting from one side of the pool to the other. Then she took away my fins, which seemed rude and really slowed me down. Then she took away the pool noodle, and I was really slow then. And finally, after a month or so, she told me I was ready to jump off the side. Now, I disputed this assertion. She had no empirical evidence, and I did not feel at all ready, but in the end, she compromised by having me jump off the 7-foot section instead of the 12-foot section, and so I caved. And by God, it was easy. I held my breath, I jumped in, my toes touched the bottom, I pushed right back up. Well, I thought, I'm a natural. Being from Indiana, where Mark Spitz did his collegiate swimming, I figured maybe this kind of excellence was just in the water, so to speak. But after a couple of 7-foot jumping in sessions, my teacher said, now it really is time for you to go to 12 feet. Next session, she said, you're doing it. She left me no room for argument. It's hard to put into words just how terrified I was. I stood at the edge of the pool by the 12-foot marker and in my swim shorts and goggles reflected on my mortality. If I was going to die today, it would be at least nice not to be stared at by high school students heading to their math classes, but here we were. I would be brave, though. I decided I would risk my life and jump into the 12-foot. My instructor told me that I could trust the water, that there's no way I would make it all the way to the bottom before the water itself started to push me back up to the surface. That must be true, I thought, because I've heard that dead people float. I did eventually jump, and friends, it was not at all like jumping into the 7-foot section. My feet didn't touch, so I had nothing to push back with. I didn't realize how long I would be underwater. I flailed and spat and sputtered back to the surface. But in the end, she was right, technically. I started moving naturally back toward the surface. And I got better and better at jumping into the deep end, at trusting that the water would hold me. And over time, after facing my fears and trusting that I would be safe when I was challenged, I was transformed from a non-swimmer to a swimmer. Well, I mean, relative swimmer. It's challenging transformation. I asserted last week that liberal religion has two complementary goals, the transformation of the self and the transformation of the world, and that neither of them precedes the other, but instead they're always feeding one another. As we work to transform the world, we are ourselves transformed spiritually, and when we're transformed spiritually, we're better able to transform the world. Today I want to talk about the goal of the transformation of the self. Now this goal is natural for most faith groups, especially those who talk a lot about enlightenment, as is the case with Eastern religion, or salvation, as is the case with a lot of Western religion. Transformation of the self is a core and obvious part of the mission. But maybe it isn't the first thing most people think about when they think about Unitarian Universalism. We're probably more well known for our work on social justice, the transformation of the world. But as we state in the fourth of our 7 principles, we expect one another to be on a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Spiritual growth is central to our mission too. Now, although I think it is the right word to use. I would acknowledge a bit of a disconnect in using the word transformation for us when it comes to the human self. It's illustrated by one of the most popular analogies for transformation. People like to use the image of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, and that truly is lovely. What a miraculous thing that is. But do you know what happens inside those cocoons? Oh my Lord. The caterpillar essentially digests itself, turning into goo, before its cells reorganize and turn into a butterfly. And that's the niced up version. It really does turn from one thing to another in a very short amount of time. Some of us may have spiritual experiences that turn us into goo and reform us. These big moments that change everything. Psychologist Abraham Maslow called them peak experiences. Something suddenly dawns on us and it affects the way we live the rest of our lives. Most of us probably have one, maybe two of those in our lifetimes. But it doesn't make much sense to have that kind of transformation as our goal. To be constantly being radically transformed into something new. I get tired just thinking about that. In fact, trying to have one of those big peak experiences is probably one of the best ways to not have one of those big peak experiences. It seems to me spiritual growth is best when it happens gradually, over a lifetime. I'll get back to what that can look like in a moment, but first I want to talk about another objection to the idea of personal transformation that comes up in Unitarian Universalist circles. Maybe it's best stated in a bumper sticker. Maybe there are a few of them in our parking lot this morning. It reads, "Born okay the first time." Have you seen that? Have you seen that bumper sticker? Now, I mean, you know, it's one of those. That's a reaction against born-again Christianity. The type of born-again Christianity, which doesn't include all of it, that condemns us as sinful human beings. And I get that reaction. It's, in fact, in our historical DNA as Unitarian Universalists to insist on the basic goodness of humanity. We are all born full of potential, not full of sin. We don't need to be saved from anything. We certainly don't need to be washed clean of anything. But we are born with worth and dignity. We are not born mature. Our charge is to be developing into the kind of people who can transform the world. Grounded, growing in love and understanding, learning all our lives long. That's the kind of transformation we UUs tend to talk about. But how can it be that we who claim to accept all as they are can also talk about the transformation of the self? Last week in her worship associate welcome, Roz Hawkins quoted Reverend Douglas Taylor, who said in a sermon, "One way Unitarian Universalism can find an authentic way into the idea of transformation of self is to start with acceptance. Maybe we can hear the call for transformation not as a hint that we're somehow not good enough as we are, that we're flawed and unacceptable as we begin. Maybe instead we can hear it the way a Zen Buddhist master once put it. You are perfect just the way you are, and you could use some improvement." So we believe in the power of the search for truth and meaning. It is a powerful thing to be committed to a spiritual path and to really follow it with discipline. Maybe it's a particular religious tradition. Maybe it's meditating so many times a week, or regular reading of Taoist or Buddhist or poetic or scientific texts that cause us to lift up our eyes to the heavens in awe and wonder. Often it includes being part of a group of people, like our Spirit of Life circle or chalice circles. Whatever it is that speaks to you, it's key to be in regular contact with it, to allow it to shape you in ways you may not expect. But we Unitarian Universalists, and maybe Americans in general, have a weakness in this area. Our 7 principles are fairly well known, at least among us, but less known are the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalist faith that follow the principles in our bylaws. A wonderful place for a spiritual statement, by the way, in the bylaws of the, I don't know. Our sources include direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, words and deeds of prophetic people, wisdom from world religions, with Jewish and Christian teachings broken out of that, humanist teachings, and spiritual teachings of earth-based traditions. And, well, sure, we draw inspiration from all those places. But if we're not careful, we could simply flit from source to source, making surface contact with each one, tailoring them to fit our ideas, but not being truly transformed by any of them. We could put ourselves in the place of master of those traditions, never as the pupil. Devi Saul wrote, "The essence of spiritual practice is change, self-transformation. If you're on any spiritual path, you have to be ready and willing to not fit in where you used to, with the people you used to, and or the way you're used to. Why? Spiritual practice changes you. It changes you at your deepest levels. A spiritual practice should have some kind of effect on you. It should make you feel something different inside, not necessarily immediately, but at the very least after a period of consistent practice." It's related, I think, to one of the great cultural obstacles to the transformation of self in our society, consumerism. In a consumer culture, everything is tailored to the consumer. Have you walked into a donut shop recently? I get choice paralysis. I've seen donuts with bacon, which are amazing, donuts with Captain Crunch cereal on them, donuts with grape-flavored icing, filled with all different kinds of goo. We have that kind of choice with so many things. Cars, clothes, television shows. It's amazing. And I'm not necessarily complaining, except we can come to be kind of bratty. At the first hint of dissatisfaction, or heaven forbid, delayed gratification, we will take our business elsewhere, thank you very much. And I'm afraid we often bring that same approach to our spirituality. We want lovely readings and hikes in the mountains, and we ought to have those things. But if we're never challenged to change the way we think about things, we are shortchanging ourselves. Transformation happens when we are agitated into looking at ourselves and our actions with new eyes. It is possible that we could always be jumping off of the 7-foot section, never breaking through the fear we might experience when we first encounter a tradition, never experiencing the transformation only possible when we really trust a spiritual path to shape us and bring us back to the surface safely, even when we're not sure we like every part of it. It makes me think of a conundrum that the Board of Trustees here and I have talked about recently. One of the aspects of the business community that has trickled into congregational work is a fever for measurement. And that's mostly a good thing, the way I see it. It helps us know whether we're on track to meet our goals. But some of us have been asking ourselves this question. One of our goals is that congregants be growing spiritually. How in the world do you measure that? We'll figure it out, though the answer probably won't be a set of numbers. Transformation of the self, I think, is a little bit like raising children. We hope to expose them to the right conditions for healthy development. But the evidence of that growth comes when our children face problems and opportunities in their lives. How do they engage struggle? Can they manage disappointment? How do they react when they're successful? Are they graceful? As a parent, I hope mostly to plant seeds that help my children grow in these areas throughout their lives. Like growing up emotionally and physically, spiritual growth and transformation are lifelong projects. They're paths that we are on, not boxes we can check off a list. They prepare us to face the inevitable joys and pitfalls of life. Some religious movements have become enamored of instant transformations. If you say the right prayer, if you perform the right ritual, if you ally yourself with the right guru, you will, in short order, be transformed, saved, enlightened. But it just doesn't seem to work that way. The transformation of the self takes sustained, concentrated effort. That time I spent learning to swim has become a metaphor for my spiritual life. I want to be brave enough to engage deeply in my spiritual growth, even when it's uncomfortable. I want to remember the big challenges to my thinking may be painful, even frightening in the short term, but if I stick with it, I will come back to the surface stronger. I think these things are true for all of us. And so this morning I leave you with a few questions. Do you know what spiritual path or tradition really makes you come alive, really challenges you? Are you following it with care and intention? Does your spirituality ever call you to jump off the 12-foot side, to look critically at your ideas and actions and change them? May each of us be on the path of transformation, and may our personal transformations prepare us to change the world. Amen.